Just before midnight on March the 12th, 1928, a 700-foot concrete wall gave way in a narrow canyon north of Los Angeles. 12.5 billion gallons of water tore down the valley below it through towns full of people who were already asleep. By morning, more than 400 of them would be dead. What makes this story so unsettling isn't just the death toll, it's that one of the most respected engineers in the country stood at the base of that dam 12 hours earlier, looked directly at the warning signs and told everyone it was safe.
To understand why a dam was even sitting here in the first place, you have to understand the man who built it. William Mulholland arrived in the United States from Ireland in 1874. He was a teenager with no formal education past the age of 15. He started as a common laborer, digging ditches for the Los Angeles City Water Company. In his off hours, he taught himself hydraulics and geology from library textbooks, working through it alone by lamplight, with no mentor and no institution backing any of it. Somehow it worked. By 1886, he had risen from ditch digger to superintendent of the entire Los Angeles water system. At the time, the city itself was barely more than a dusty outpost of 50,000 people. That would not stay true for long. By the early 1900s, Los Angeles was growing faster than its water supply could keep up with, and its future as a major city depended on Mulholland solving that problem. His solution was audacious: a 233-mile aqueduct dragging water down from the Owens Valley, across desert and mountain terrain, straight into the city. No American city had ever attempted anything close to this scale before. It was finished in 1913, ahead of schedule and under budget. At the dedication, as the first water poured into the San Fernando Valley in front of a crowd of thousands, Mulholland turned and said 4 words that would follow him for the rest of his life. "There it is. Take it." That sentence turned him into the most trusted engineer California had ever produced. Newspapers called him a visionary. The city named streets after him. And that trust is exactly what allowed something dangerous to take root. Nobody, at any level of city or state government, thought it was necessary to check his work. There was no state dam safety board in California at the time, no requirement for outside geological review, no regulatory body with any authority to override Mulholland's own judgment on a project of this scale. He was, in effect, the designer, the construction supervisor, and the final safety inspector, all in one man. And at the time, that wasn't seen as a risk, it was seen as efficiency. The aqueduct alone still left the city exposed though. A single 233-mile supply line had no backup. If it was ever knocked out by an earthquake, a landslide, or sabotage, Los Angeles could be without water for weeks. So Mulholland's next move was to build a chain of reservoir along the route, capable of keeping the city running even if the aqueduct itself went down. In 1924, he began construction on the largest of them, in a narrow gorge called San Francisquito Canyon, 40 miles north of the city, the St. Francis Dam. It was designed to hold back more than 12 billion gallons of water directly above a valley that, until then, had never needed to think twice about what might one day sit above it. Here's the detail that matters more than almost anything else in this story. The dam was originally designed to stand 175 feet tall. During construction, Mulholland raised that height twice, adding 20 feet total to increase how much water it could hold. He did not widen the base to compensate. In dam engineering, height and base width are supposed to scale together, because a taller wall of concrete holding back water creates dramatically more pressure at the foundation. Raising the height without widening the base thins out the safety margin at exactly the moment it needed to grow. But even that wasn't the deciding factor in what happened. The bigger problem, and the one nobody could see, was sitting in the ground itself.
The eastern wall of the canyon was a rock formation called césped schist, fractured, imperfect but solid enough to build on. The western wall was something else entirely. It sat on Pelona schist, an ancient, badly weathered rock that had already failed once before in a landslide so old that nobody alive in 1924 had any memory of it. And Pelona schist wasn't just weak. When it got saturated with water, it didn't lose strength gradually the way most rock does. It effectively dissolved, turning from something like solid stone into something closer to wet clay. Mulholland built the entire western half of his dam directly on top of the scar of a prehistoric landslide. Nobody on his team ever identified it because there was no dedicated soil engineer on the project and no geological survey conducted to anything close to a modern standard. He trusted his own eyes, and his eyes told him the rock looked solid enough.
Construction finished in May of 1926. The reservoir behind the new dam filled steadily for the next 18 months, and almost exactly as it reached full capacity for the first time, in the opening months of 1928, the dam began to talk back. New cracks appeared in sections of concrete that had shown none before. Fresh springs of water started emerging at the base of the structure, water that had no business surfacing there at all. And some of that new seepage was running visibly muddy. That's one of the clearest warning signs in all of dam engineering. It means the foundation itself has already begun eroding internally, and it's carrying sediment with it as it goes. The dam keeper on site, a man named Tony Harnischfeger, noticed the muddy seepage and reported it up the chain to Mulholland's office in Los Angeles. On the morning of March 12, 1928, at roughly 10 o'clock, Mulholland drove out to the site personally, alongside his assistant Harvey Van Norman, to look at it with his own eyes. The two men walked the base of the dam together, inspecting the cracks, examining the seepage directly. Mulholland had more than 40 years of field experience building dams and water infrastructure across California. Based on all of it, his professional judgment in that moment was that what they were looking at was ordinary structural settling, the kind of minor shifting any new concrete structure goes through as it adjusts under load. He declared the dam safe. He got back in his car. He drove the 40 miles home to Los Angeles. Less than 12 hours later, at just before midnight, the St. Francis Dam collapsed entirely.
This wasn't a slow leak. It wasn't a gradual failure playing out over hours. It was a near total collapse happening within minutes in the darkest part of the night, with almost nobody awake to see it start. Forensic engineers would later reconstruct what happened, piecing it together decades afterward with modern soil science. The western foundation, the exact section sitting on that ancient landslide scar, simply stopped holding the load. Once that side of the canyon gave way, the rest of the dam had nothing left to lean on. It came apart almost as a single event, not a progressive one. 12.5 billion gallons of stored water were released down the canyon in a matter of minutes. Picture what that actually means. Not a flood spilling over a riverbank. A wall of water in places near the dam estimated at over 100 feet tall, moving down a narrow canyon at close to 18 miles an hour through a valley full of people who had gone to sleep in complete silence. There was no siren, no alarm network, no organised emergency system of any kind in place to warn them something was wrong.
The very first people in its path never had a real chance to hear it coming. A construction camp called Powerhouse No. 2 sat less than a mile downstream of the dam. It housed many of the same workers and their families who had helped build the very system now surging toward them in the dark. Of the roughly 67 to 70 people believed to have been there that night, only a small handful survived. Entire families were gone within the first few minutes, before word of the collapse had even traveled a mile further down the canyon. From there, the wall of water kept moving, down through the rest of San Francisquito Canyon, out into the wider Santa Clara River Valley, through the small farming towns of Peru, Fillmore, Santa Paula, and Saticoy, and eventually all the way to the Pacific coastline near Ventura. More than 50 miles downstream from a dam that had, to the one man responsible for judging its safety, looked entirely stable 12 hours earlier. where any warning existed at all along that 50-mile stretch. It came almost entirely from ordinary people improvising in real time, not from any official system. Telephone operators in towns along the flood's path started calling ahead frantically the moment word began to spread, waking up families they had never met based on nothing but rumor. A motorcycle officer named Thornton Edwards is remembered for racing directly ahead of the floodwater through the streets of Santa Paula, pounding on doors, shouting at families to get to higher ground. One man on a motorcycle trying to outrun a wall of water through his own town because there was no formal system built to do it in his place. In some communities, that frantic improvised warning worked, and it saved lives. In others, it arrived only minutes too late or never arrived at all. And here's the part of this story the official record never fully captured. A significant number of the dead that night were Mexican and Mexican-American farm laborers, living in camps built on the lowest, cheapest land in the valley. The exact land nobody else wanted, and the exact land the water reached first and hit hardest. Many of these workers were never fully counted in the official aftermath. Some were transient, working seasonally, with families back in Mexico who may never have learned for certain what happened to them or when. The official death toll has stood for close to a century at somewhere between 411 and 431 people, depending on the source. Researchers who've since gone back through mission records, court claims, and old newspaper archives believe the real number was almost certainly higher, though nobody has ever been able to say by how much. An unknown number of the dead were never identified at all, and in some cases were never even formally reported missing. Search crews found some bodies within the first few days, tangled in wreckage near where the dam had stood. Others surfaced weeks later, carried downstream by the receding water, and disturbingly, some remains connected to the disaster turned up much later than that, from much farther away. Human remains tied to the St. Francis flood were still occasionally washing up along the coastline near the Mexican border years afterward, carried out to sea and returned by the tide, long after the official count of the dead had already been closed. The physical destruction across the valley was staggering. Roughly 1,240 homes were destroyed or badly damaged. Close to 8,000 acres of farmland were stripped bare or buried under mud. Bridges, roads, and phone lines across the valley were wiped out in a single night, cutting off entire communities for days. Within days, an official inquest began, moving fast given the scale of public pressure. Mulholland testified in front of the coroner's jury directly, and he didn't try to hide from it. His most quoted line from that testimony survives because of how raw it was. He told the jury he only wished it had been him who died, instead of the hundreds of people who actually had. The jury's official finding placed the primary responsibility on Mulholland and on the underlying design of the dam. But almost as an aside, buried inside the ruling, it also acknowledged that no functioning regulatory system existed anywhere in California at the time capable of catching a failure like this before it happened. That regulatory gap wasn't a minor footnote. It was, in a very real sense, just as responsible for over 400 deaths as any specific mistake Mulholland made personally. He was never criminally charged. Under the laws that existed in California in 1928, there was, realistically, no legal path to charge him. Mulholland resigned from the water department within months of the disaster and never took on another major engineering project again. He spent his remaining years largely out of public view, reportedly consumed by guilt, until his death in 1935. Okay, before we get into what happened that morning, I want to say something. People hear this story and assume Mulholland must have been careless, cutting corners somewhere, ignoring something obvious, and I just don't think that's fair. Everyone who worked with him said the same thing. Rigorous, almost obsessive about the work. Self-taught, sure, but completely devoted to whatever he was building.
Sure, I don't doubt he cared, but this isn't really about whether he cared, it's about whether one man should have ever had that much unchecked authority over a structure that could kill hundreds of people if he got it wrong.
Maybe, but think about what actually failed here. It wasn't some crack he saw and waved off. It was buried underground, literally. The western foundation was sitting on top of an ancient landslide scar, and there was no tool in 1924 that could have found that.
Right, and I get that. But he still personally drove out there that final morning, walked the base himself, looked at the seepage, looked at the cracks, and decided it was fine. That's not bad luck. That's a decision he made.
Sure, but it's the same decision-making that carried an aqueduct 233 miles across desert and granite without a single structural failure. That's what makes him so hard to judge. The exact same judgment that made him a legend is the same judgment that missed this.
Which is kind of my whole point, honestly. If even his best judgment could miss something like this, that's exactly why it shouldn't have been the only check in the room.
I mean, I don't disagree that oversight should have existed. I just don't think it means he was reckless.
Never said reckless, I said unqualified to be the only signature on something that big.
Well, either way, the state clearly leaned toward your end of it. Within about a year, California passed its first Dam Safety Act, independent geological surveys, independent engineering review, state inspections going forward.
Yeah, that's basically the state admitting no one person's judgment should ever be the only thing standing between a full reservoir and the people living under it.
Or it's the state admitting even a brilliant engineer can be wrong once, and once is enough. Doesn't mean he shouldn't have been the guy.
We're not going to agree on that one.
Nope.
Anyway, funny thing is, the story barely stuck around nationally after it happened.
Yeah, the Great Depression hits the following year, and everyone's attention just moves somewhere else.
Nationally maybe, not locally though. Families in the Santa Clara Valley kept telling this story for generations, parents to kids, kids to their own kids.
And honestly, we're only talking about it now with this much detail because modern geologists went back through it. Computer modeling, modern soil science, the original inquest records.
That's how we finally know why that Western Foundation gave out when it did.
So if you strip it down, there's really 3 theories people still argue about.
And you already know which one I'm picking.
Obviously.
Design and oversight theory. He raised the dam's height twice during construction, never widened the base to match. That's not geology, that's a decision. Combine that with zero independent review and you've got a disaster waiting regardless of what the ground was doing.
And that's exactly where I think you're being too hard on him. Because there's the geological failure theory too. Unstable foundation. Ancient landslide nobody knew existed. Completely undetectable with the tools available in 1924. That's the one with the strongest evidence behind it today.
I still think the decisions are doing most of the work there.
And I still think you're not giving the geology enough credit.
Fair enough. Third theory is sabotage. And this is probably the one place we actually agree.
Yeah. People pointed to the Owens Valley water wars. There'd been dynamite attacks on the aqueduct before, so it wasn't a completely crazy idea at the time.
But almost a century later, nobody's ever found real evidence anyone blew up that dam.
Which is why pretty much no serious historian gives it any weight anymore.
Most modern analysis lands somewhere between our two positions anyway. Bad geology, bad design choices, zero oversight, a mix of all of it.
Maybe. If you're asking me though, I'm still putting most of the weight on what was sitting in the ground underneath him.
And I'm still putting most of it on the decisions Mulholland made.
Today, if you drive into San Francisco Canyon looking for physical evidence of what happened, there's remarkably little left to see. A handful of scattered concrete fragments still sit half buried in the brush near where the dam once stood. Easy to walk right past unless you already know where to look. A memorial has since been placed near the original site, along with markers in several local cemeteries, positioned over the mass graves where unidentified victims were laid to rest together, because there was no other way to bury people that nobody left alive could put a name to. William Mulholland gave Los Angeles the water supply that let it grow into one of the largest cities in the world. And less than 15 years later, at the height of his career, a dam built under his own personal authority collapsed and killed hundreds of the very same people that water system had been built to serve. He inspected that structure himself on its final morning. He found nothing that told him what was coming 12 hours later. By the next morning, an entire valley had been permanently rewritten, and an entire branch of American civil engineering had been forced, at enormous human cost, to accept that no single man's professional judgment, however brilliant, should ever again be allowed to stand as the only thing between a full reservoir and the people living quietly beneath it.